Good morning, friends. Well, at last it's warping up time with this lovely green yarn. This is a cotton that I got on sale at a really cute store in Warrenton, North Carolina. It's not a very big skein. I have two of them, so we'll hope that this is enough to do a warp on a nice long scarf that I'm hopefully making for a friend. So I'll show it to you when I get it on the loom. Okay, I've gotten one skein pulled through my heddle, and looking at this front beam, I'd say I probably got 2.5 inches of finished scarf here. So I'm definitely going to need to use both skeins. The end of this first skein stopped in the middle down here. It's a little bit out of the frame, but anyway, I'm going to need to tie that off at the other end at the peg, I guess, to make sure that I don't get a knot in the middle of my scarf. Okay, yeah, this is working fine. This is the easiest kind of warping up you can do with just one color and no tying off and cutting and tying off again. If you're wondering how I'm hanging this hank of yarn without turning it into a ball, I've got it hanging on the on the handle of the camera, okay? And so it's long and hangs down this way. It's easy to unwrap these loops. I have one end of the tie to the back so it doesn't mess me up. And I have it standing right next to the loom, so I can feed it right over. And about 3 unloops, if I can call it that, of this hank, or whatever you want to call this, of yarn is enough to make one pass down to my warping peg. Okay, so it's working fine now. All right, I'll get the rest of this done and then I'll show you. Okay, so I have all of the green warped up. I have a little dab left over here. It's a little bit wider here. I guess I've probably got about a 5-inch scarf. Maybe a little wide for a scarf, not too bad, but I didn't see the point of wasting any of this green yarn because I can't imagine using it for something else. Okay, so now I'm going to wind this up. I'm going to put my tensioning device on to help me get a nice, good, even warp up. Okay, and I'll show you that when I get it on. Now I've snipped my warp off at the peg, and remember that the purpose of your warping peg is not to produce tension. Don't put any tension on your warp as you're yanking it around that peg. Don't pull it. The peg is just the location to help you get your length. The tension goes into your yarn, into your warp as you roll it on the back roller, okay? So, and the other thing that I've done, in addition to putting a little yarn ponytail on the far end of my severed warp, I've also got one kind of in the middle, okay? Just keeps things orderly. This isn't a very wide warp. It's not a very complicated warp, but I do want to keep it tidy as I'm rolling it up, and I don't want to have to think about that other end as I'm working up here by the heddle. Okay, let's get that tensioning device on now. Okay, I'll put my 2 side braces on here. This is an Ashford loom, so as you see, the sidebar of the loom dips down, and that's not a very good place to put your tensioning device, not only because it's low, but also because it's got a little curve in it right here. And so you want something nice and sturdy and flat. My husband made these little side rails, and then there's one over here too. He's also put a little flat end on the end of this so that it's a stop. It keeps it from moving forward when I'm weaving. So he did all that with yardsticks and I think some glue, epoxy or something. Here are my 4 rollers for my tensioning device. These are 2 dowels. These were both like mop handles or something, okay? And so even though it is an Ashford, there's actually extra room here for this tensioning device because I've raised it up, okay? And that really helps it to work well that it's sitting so high, okay? So now let's get it tied up. Okay, I fiddled with my yarn a little bit here to get it to lie flat over there along that second roller. But now I'm going to go ahead and put this zip tie on before I put my elastics on, okay? And try to keep the little leg of it sticking up there. It's just so much easier to get this on now before I've put all these ties on the end, the rubber bands on the end, because I can still really maneuver these rollers to fit in there. Okay, and I'll go down and do the other end. Let's get these rubber bands and ponytail holders on so that these rollers will stay nice and secure. Because once you get these rubber bands are probably better because they lay flat and actually allow the rollers to get closer together. The tension is created when you have enough rollers close to, well, it's really created by the up and down between the rollers. If you get the rollers too close together, you can actually, especially with cotton yarn, you can get yarn that won't pass between the rollers because they're too close together. So maybe these ponytails are a good idea to give a little bit of space. Okay, now this is all nice and snug. Okay, all right, let's go do the other end. Okay, I've got all my tensioning device set up. I think in the end I've decided I prefer these rubber bands that come on your vegetables to the ponytail holders. I just think they're easier to put on, but both will work. The other thing I've done is to add a little rubber band down here that goes around the end of this side rail and around the bottom of the loom, here the base of the loom, just to make sure that these two rails don't go popping off when I'm cranking this up. It does put a lot of tension into your warp, and you can really feel it. It's wonderful how smooth and lovely it is, but it can pop these side rails off, and I want to keep them down. Okay, so now it's nice how smoothly this goes. So I'm going to roll this up and let you see how it looks. I want you to see as I'm rolling up this warp, look how smooth the yarn is back here before it goes on that back stick. Look how smooth it is here. These tensioning rollers are keeping everything tidy. And then look how it is here. See, it's bunchy and unorganized. My heddle is combing all this yarn smooth before it goes into the tensioning rollers. And that's so important. So if you have a plan where you put your rollers in front here, you don't get the advantage, the help of your heddle smoothing all these, combing them out before they go in here. Because keeping these very smooth and in order as they go down is something you don't want to do by hand, okay? You don't want to be fiddling moving them as they go into the rollers or as they go onto your back stick. And the rollers do that for you here, which is so nice. Now I'm going to roll this a little bit as you're watching. This tensioning device I think is too tight. I probably need to redo my zip ties, and especially, this is the second time I've done cotton on here, and cotton tends to grab these rollers and it doesn't want to slip through. Acrylic yarn would do fine on this, this tension, but I'm having to pull back a little bit on this very first roller that you can't really see behind the heddle, just to open up the tensioning device a little bit so that it'll feed in. But look how I don't even have to hold my yarn, my warp that's hanging down. I don't have to do anything to it. And it's really, it's like doing pasta. It's going in crinkly and it's coming out smooth. It's really beautiful. And even though it is time consuming to set it up, and it can misbehave and that kind of thing, it really makes such a difference. It doesn't just give you a smooth warp on your back roller, it actually evens out all the tension so you don't get tension problems in your warp later on as you're weaving. And that's, of course, the biggest help. I just took out that first little pony, and so now we're going to keep on rolling up. And I love that I can roll up my warp without waiting for anybody to come home and help me hold it on the other end. Nobody has to hold it because all the action is taking place right here. And it takes more cranking on my hand down here to work this gear, you really have to crank it around because you can feel the tension in there. I think it's fascinating how uneven, and we all know this is true, that your long warp that goes down to your warping peg, we know that those strings are very uneven, and by the time you get to the end, even though you just snipped them and they were all the same length on the warping peg, you get down to the end and they're all different lengths. And that is another thing that you want to, you know, get rid of as you're putting it, your warp onto your back roller. Just makes everything so smooth. So now I'll take out my second pony. This should be about a 70 to 72 inch scarf, hopefully. Okay, we'll just leave those hanging down. Look how easy that is. This reminds me of playing with Play-Doh when I was a kid, except for kind of backwards. Okay, make sure we don't get them too short. That looks about right. Okay, so there I'm done with my warping up. Let me crank this. Okay, there's my little tails. Now I'll take the tensioning device off now, and then I'll slay through my heddle and tie it all off, and I'll be ready to weave. Okay, so I have slayed my yarn through my heddle, which just means that I used my little slaying hook to pull one of every two yarns through the little eyes here. And now, then I knotted them off at a nice distance so they would not come down all the way to this front stick, warping stick. And now I'm going to tie this on. I've just got some nice twine here. You put it around the warping stick, pass it through that knot. See how that pulls up? See how that pulls up nicely there? And I guess you could say that in a way this is really where the tension is created as well. Is putting tension on this front warping stick to that back stick back there. This is when you're just making a scarf, this is such a fast process. As I said, this is probably the easiest scarf to make because the warp is all one color. It's important to remember that the warp is the part of your weave that kind of disappears. It's almost always true that the weft yarn dominates the weave, unless you pick a very insipid weft yarn and have a very strong warp pattern. But I prefer this time to let my warp disappear in the background. This will just have a nice green, general green background feel. And then I will have my my weft yarn, which is this yarn. This will dominate. It's thicker, it's sparklier, it's metallic, it's variegated. So I'm excited to see what this does with this as just kind of its background. Okay. And we'll talk about yardage here in just a second as well when I sit down with this weave. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to tie this off, and then I'm going to pull this back a little bit. I'm going to put some scrap yarn in here and some little cardboard strips to get a very nice solid straight line before I begin my weave. Okay, now you see I've got a little bit of scrap yarn here, not too much. I think I have 6 individual pieces of yarn there. And then I've put these 2 cardboard dividers in here. This really gives you this perfect finished edge along here as you begin the weave. Now I'm going to roll it all the way back till this is on this back roller back here. And then we'll sit. I'll put it at my desk and rest it on the edge, and we'll talk about yarn. Okay, let's look at this yarn. Never taken it out of its balls before. There's an end. It has metallic stuff running all the way through it. I think that's going to look great. And I love the variegation of the brown and the red and the green. I almost wish it had a little pop of yellow or something. I've got a tangle here. Okay. I can't wait to get some of this on. Now, when I looked at the yardage on the green cotton, which is this one, each skein is 82 yards, okay? And this one is 71. There it is, 71 yards, okay? So I actually, technically I have less of this than I do of the cotton, although this is thicker. And I'm not going to beat it very hard because I don't want it to be at all stiff. I want it to have a lovely soft drape. And the other consideration is that this weft yarn is only going to be in the actual proper weave. It's not going to be in the fringe, and a lot of that other green yarn, the warp yarn, does get used up. Its yardage gets used up in stuff that you snip off the ends. So I'm not too worried that I should be able to get this to go all the way. I hope so. If I don't, I'll end up with a slightly shorter scarf, which will be fine. I don't think it'll be very short. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this does. I'm going to try to put this whole one on here, maybe, or half. I'd like to have as few joints in this weave, of course, as possible. Sometimes they're hard to avoid, but okay, I'm so excited to get this on. This is the fun part and the very fast part. 69% superwash wool, 30% polyester, 1% polyester, 30% polyamide, whatever that is. This is primarily wool. That's important to know. Boy, it doesn't look like wool at all. Okie dokie, let's start weaving. Now I've spent about maybe 5 minutes. Look how much I've already done. This is going to be a very fast weave. I'm doing it fairly loosely because I want these warp threads to show through, because I'd only done maybe 3 rows down here when I realized that I was going to end up with a brown sparkly scarf if I beat really, really hard, which I didn't want to do. And this yarn is not that much wider than the green. It's a bit wider, but not much. And even though on the ball, or even here, you see there's variegation, there is some green. I've already done, what, 6, 8 inches of weaving, and I haven't hit any green in this yet. It's all brown. So I'm going to have long stretches of the scarf. They're going to be brown metallic, and I want some other color. So that's why I want to really make sure that that green shows through, and I think it's looking really nice. Okay, this is such an easy weave. 1 yarn for the warp, 1 yarn for the weft. I've picked yarns that are smooth and are the right size for my my loom. Like this yarn is not too thick for my heddle, and so it slayed very quickly and easily. It doesn't stick to itself. Cotton doesn't do that, and so as I'm changing the shed back and forth, I don't have to manually separate it from itself, so it's very quick and easy to do. This is very nice and slick, even though it's a wool. Sometimes wool can be sticky, but this is not. So I'm real pleased with this. Hopefully this will be a very quick weave, and I'll be able to show it to you soon. I may catch you up with it when I do get some of the variegation coming in the weft yarn. Okay? This weave is going so fast that I'd better do a little video while I still have it on the loom. It doesn't look anything like what I expected. I will tell you that. This is what it looks like, the weft yarn, when it's here on the shuttle. And I guess the first thing I noticed when I started weaving way back at the beginning was that this kind of browny, reddy, rusty color of this wool, it lasts a really, really long time. And the green that I was hoping would really shine out, which is like this, there's not a lot of that. And it took forever before I finally got to that on that ball of yarn. So that was a little disconcerting because I really like the portions of it when you have this green against that background green. It just goes together really nicely. Now, as I think I said before, I am not beating this very hard, and so you're ending up here with space between like this red row and this red row. There's space there for the green to shine through, and I think I'm really glad I did that because in the end, I've ended up liking this green more than I like what I'm going to have to call the brown, I'm sorry to say. Let's look at that ball again. I guess I would just say that this is a bit of a cautionary tale about yarn, that sometimes how it looks on the skein or in the ball is not how it looks when you get it into the weave or even the crochet or knit. It just looks really different. Now you see I've taken off, probably not quite half of this one and put it on that shuttle. And on this one I ended up with the green on there. And there's a little bit of, that's not really a green. There's not a lot of green left on this ball. Maybe a little bit in the middle somewhere. Anyway, so, but I'm pleased enough with it. It's a bumpy yarn. It's the tension is really good. Like I just cranked this back a couple of rows ago, and I still, at the end of this weave, have a nice straight line. And the tensioning device really allows you to keep a pretty good even line without getting these wonky, wavy, inconsistent tension lines done. This is superwash merino, which means that you can wash it. This is wool that's washable. It's not going to shrink on you. And this is cotton. So I think this will be a good scarf for somebody. So I'll finish this off and I'll show you what it looks like once I get it off the loom. Okie dokie. Now I've gotten to a spot where some of my weft yarn is this light green. Oh boy, in the camera it just really blends in, doesn't it? Wow. I kind of like that. I like this. I like the fact that it's a very gradual change. Sometimes you get a yarn cake or a yarn ball or skein that is supposed to be variegated, and then when you start working on it, you find out that the color change is immediate from one color right into the next, and that's not always what you want. This is very gradual. See how it's dark brown here into more red, really a rusty color, and then slowly it goes into this kind of an olive green. What's a strange color? Almost got a little bit of gold in there too. Really pretty. I may like this scarf after all. I was quite doubtful at the beginning, but maybe it's growing on me. I will say that when you do this gentle beat where you leave space in between every row, the weave goes faster. It really goes a lot faster, so that's just a little tip. Okay. Okay, it's time to take this off of the front beam, so I'm going to unlatch my gear over there. I've already sewn in my little end from my weft, and I've knotted all these. I'll trim them later to make sure they're the same length. I thought it'd be fun for you to see how this comes off. Now, if there's any puckering in it where it's not lying totally flat, then this is my opportunity to make it very, very flat before I knot the other end, okay? Because it's really pretty easy to lay it out on a nice long flat surface and just kind of gently ease that weave down while these ends down here are still loose, okay? And that's probably what I'll do. Put it out on my desk here, some other nice long. Actually, I'll probably stretch it out on the box that my loom came in. I've kept that box all these years, and it's been very useful for keeping stuff in. Now I'm taking out the scrap yarn. I actually really enjoyed this weave more than some of the ones I've done recently because it went so fast. Some of the houndstooth pattern is so pretty, but oh my goodness, it's just a backbreaker to cut and retie and cut and retie all those the alternating colors, and I really liked this. You know what we used to say in the prayer shawl ministry that I was in and am still sometimes in? I always felt like you could get interest, something really interesting in your prayer shawl knit, or this is true of weaving too, either by a very interesting yarn or a very interesting pattern. A fun, complicated yarn with lots of color, texture, or a pattern that was kind of complicated and very fun. But if you take a really fancy complicated yarn and you use it on a complicated pattern, you're not going to see that yarn, or you're not going to see the pattern. They get lost in each other. I think that's true of weaving here too, is I picked a kind of interesting weft yarn. Didn't turn out as interesting as I wanted. Okay, I'm going to start down on this end that I've already knotted and kind of finished off, and I'm just going to gently press the warp yarns down this way. Okay, now you'll notice on this weave the edges are bumpy, and that's because that weft yarn was kind of chunky. Okay, and as I go, I'll probably just roll this up on the end so it doesn't go off on the floor. And the further we go, you'll notice that there will be probably this actually, I tell you, using that tensioning device makes a difference. It makes the tension on your, look how flat that is, straight off the loom. I'm quite pleased with that. I've had weaves before that had a lot of crinkliness where the selvages would be really tight and the middle would be loose, or vice versa, and it would give you ripples and kind of tucks. There's just a teeny bit of this here. That needs to come together just a hair. I'm really not going to worry about the selvages too much, because when you use chunky yarns like this, they're going to do what they're going to do. Yeah, this turned out. And it has some bumpy imperfections in that weft yarn that are just in there. And so I just look at this nice stripe of red and green. This variegation in here is lovely. All the way from this dark here, green, red, brown again. Yeah, I'm rather fond of this. Not that I would keep for myself. I have too many scarves already. So you see when we get down to the end, there's just a little bit of light puckering right there. This was the beginning of the weave, and there was quite a bit of I didn't want to pull in my selvage, so yeah. And here's my tail. I wove it in. I'm gonna snip it off. Okay, and then I will tie knots in this end and probably give it a wet finish, very gentle wet finish, so that some of this stuff will tighten up when I do that. And all right, and so I'll show it to you when I'm done. I keep on saying that, don't I? Please leave a comment below if you'd like to. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this channel, I'd love it if you would subscribe so I can see you here again. If you liked this particular video, then please click the thumbs up button, which tells me that you really like this particular content. There's also a little bell down there that will help you get notifications every time a new video comes out on my channel. Thank you.